Tonight, inflation falls, but the squeeze continues. Rising rents and soaring mortgage rates are the biggest issue for people living in Scottish cities.
The rent here is about 50% of my income. So when you put bills on top of that as well and the cost of food, I basically have nothing left.
Also making the headlines, climate activists target Grangemouth oil refinery. Arrests are made by police as they move in to remove them from the entrance and the top of a road tanker.
Last orders. Glasgow's 13th note closes down for good after worker strikes over pay and safety concerns. And as Alan McGregor bids farewell, Ryan Jack says Rangers are better equipped to win trophies this season.
I'm Kellyanne Woodland in Edinburgh.
And I'm John Mackay in Glasgow. This is the STV News at 6.
Good evening. Housing costs are putting the biggest strain on household budgets amid the ongoing cost of living crisis. That's according to a new report which found many in the Central Belt are spending more than a third of their income on rent or mortgage payments each month.
It comes as the UK inflation rate drops to 7.9%, down from 8.7%, the lowest level in more than a year. That means costs for the likes of food and fuel are still rising, but at a slower rate. Although the figure remains well above target, leaving many still struggling to afford their monthly outgoings. Lewis Mickey reports.
Making ends meet. Meg was 1 week from becoming homeless earlier this year. After viewing upwards of 15 properties, she finally found one, but it hasn't come cheap.
The rent here is about 50% of my income. I am a fully funded PhD student. I also work part-time in a bookstore and have a guaranteed hours job as a tutor at the university as well. So I have three streams of income, and still this place is about 50% of that. So when you put bills on top of that as well and the cost of food, I basically have nothing left.
With other costs also soaring, Meg has had to make every penny count.
I have to check my bank balance every time I go to the supermarket. And add it up as I'm going along, particularly the first month I've moved in here, having paid a substantial deposit as well as the first month's rent and then bills from my last flat and this place as well. I was literally just doing the maths as I was going around Lidl, seeing can I afford this sort of freezer meal.
While cities often see the highest housing costs, people in surrounding council areas are also being hit. Renting a one-bedroom flat in Glasgow is costing the average single person more than a third of their income each month, while residents in Edinburgh are also paying more than 30% of their wages. But it's those in Midlothian sacrificing the largest proportion of their pay towards housing, on average shelling out almost 40%. And there's pressure on those who own their property too. In Edinburgh, nearly a third of homeowners have mortgages with loans more than 4 times their annual income.
Food bills are going up, energy bills are going up, the general cost of living, as everyone knows, I'm sure, is going up. But when you have that additionality of housing pressures, then that's just an additional burden, which is really specific to the big cities and the large town, the more densely populated urban areas.
Campaign groups say this isn't new though, and fear that when the Scottish Government's imposed rent cap is removed, the situation will only get worse.
The rent freeze was helpful, but it just goes to show that what Scotland's tenants really need is a robust programme of rent controls, one that is tied to the property and not the tenancy, and these have to be long-term, permanent and meaningful rent controls.
The charity Lar Housing Trust is backed by 100% loan funding. It builds mid-market properties which allow people to stay in their own communities without breaking the bank.
We've got 740 houses across Scotland now in 10 local authority areas. So it's the equivalent of building a new house every 3 to 4 days. The rent for this 2-bedroom property here is £651 per month. And checking on a well-known website last night, I don't think there was anything for under £1,100. We tend to find in our developments that they get a real community feel. So we've got a lot of people whose friends move into other properties. There's quite a lot of switch around within developments. So it's a real community feel, plus the affordable rent that people really enjoy.
Experts are now calling on local governments to be allowed more flexibility with funding so that crisis support can be better tailored to areas that need it most. Lewis Mickey, STV News.
Arrests are being made at Grangemouth oil refinery after protesters blocked the entrance and climbed on top of a road tanker. The climate campaign group This Is Rigged began their action at the INEOS plant around 5 this morning. Our reporter Courtney Cameron is at the scene. And Courtney, more than 12 hours of protests. What's happening there now?
Yes, John, more than 12 hours indeed. It's just been within the past 15 minutes that police have started removing 4 protesters that have been sitting on top of this oil tanker for most of the day, blocking the road here at Gate 1 at INEOS. Now, they started to gather in crowds around 5 a.m. this morning, and that's a time a lot of the workers and the contractors begin their shifts here at INEOS. And this was the protesters' attempt at stopping the country's oil supply. Now, even though some of the ground protesters were removed this afternoon, we've heard that 7 were arrested. They managed to block the road for most of the day. And again, it was only within the past hour that the oil tanker started to regain access to and from the site. Now, This Is Rigged, that's the group that is demonstrating today. They're demanding that the Scottish Government vocally opposes all new oil and gas projects. And they say they've no plans to stop protesting until they do.
We've got 2 really simple demands for the Scottish Government, and unfortunately they're refusing to listen. We want them to vocally oppose all the new oil and gas projects in Scotland, and we want them to provide a fully funded transition for Scotland's oil workers. These are devolved powers that they do have, and we want them to stand up and show what Scotland stands for.
Now, this all comes just 3 days after 5 other people were arrested for taking part in another protest in INEOS at the weekend. Protesters held one of the largest camps just about a mile from the refinery here, and that was part of action on the climate emergency. Now, a spokesperson from INEOS has told us that today's action has been confined to this small part of the refinery, and the operations have remained unaffected today. I mean, it's unclear at the moment how much longer this is going to take. This has been going on all day, but it does look like the police are now trying to do all they can to move things on as soon as possible.
Courtney at Grangemouth, thank you.
Well, on to politics now, and the rows over SNP finances and Labour's U-turn on scrapping the 2-child benefits cap are rumbling on today. Our political editor, Colin Mackay, has been across them. Colin, first to Prime Minister's questions and that Labour row.
Well, this has been building up since the weekend, where Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer ruled out the reversing the plan that they had to reverse the Conservative policy, capping benefits at just 2 children. He doubled down on that, speaking alongside former Labour Prime Minister Tony Blair at a conference yesterday, and at Prime Minister's questions today, the SNP focused on that.
We keep saying, collectively as a party, we've got to take tough decisions. And in the abstract, everyone says, that's right, Keir. And then we get a tough decision. We've been in one of those for the last few days, saying, well, don't like that. Can we just not make that one?
Leader of the SNP, Stephen Flynn.
Mr. Speaker, the 2-child benefit cap, as introduced by the Conservative Party, has left 250,000 children living in poverty. So can I ask the Prime Minister, does he take comfort in knowing that the heinous legacy of that policy will no longer just be protected by Conservative members, but by Labour members too?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I welcome the Labour leader's newfound support for our policy, even though he previously committed to a different approach.
Now, Labour's being very careful of any spending commitments that they're going to make ahead of a general election, but also ahead of 3 by-elections right across England tomorrow. They don't want to do anything that could put off or scare voters.
And Colin, what's been happening with the SNP's finances?
Well, Police Scotland has been investigating the SNP's finances for about 2 years now, but Operation Branchform really came to a head when police arrested Nicola Sturgeon's husband, Peter Murrow, former chief executive of the SNP, setting up those tents in their front garden. Now, Peter Murrow was later released without charge, but today, Chief Constable Ian Livingston defended all those actions as proportionate and necessary. Now, Nicola Sturgeon herself was arrested. She was questioned as a suspect and released without charge. She wasn't speaking about this today, but she has been adamant throughout that she's done nothing wrong.
I respect and fully understand the process that is underway, but I am absolutely certain that I have done nothing wrong.
I'm not going to comment on a live police investigation. Of course, we will cooperate, fully cooperate, and do anything that the police ask us in relation to any information that they need to further their own investigation.
Now, the initial complaints to Police Scotland were about donations of about £600,000 to the SNP, initially for a referendum campaign. The complainants wondered what that money had been spent on. Well, today the Chief Constable, who retires next month, said that the investigation has now moved beyond that. He said investigations around fraud or investigations around potential embezzlement, investigations around the misuse of funds take time. Now, in 2 years of this Operation Branchform investigation, that's really the first time that the Chief Constable has given any indication at all of the direction in which this investigation may have been going.
All right, Colin, thanks very much for that. Well, other news now, and a housing charity is questioning whether a plan to reduce the number of people in temporary accommodation goes far enough. The Scottish Government has around £60 million of funding to increase the supply of social housing.
However, Shelter Scotland says there is no new money and the burden will fall on local authorities. Our political correspondent Ewan Petrie reports.
As far as I'm aware, I'm just here for the foreseeable future.
Nairi and Ali are both living in this temporary accommodation in Glenrothes. Neither knows when they will get something more permanent.
I don't know when I'll get a house or if it'll be a scatter flat or shared accommodation or anything like that, so it can be quite stressful to just have no idea what's going on.
It's been a while for them to sort out a scatter flat, I'm not going to lie. It's a bit of a joke if you ask me, but I mean, it's going to be worth it when it finally comes and I can just get everything sorted in my house and I can finally get my life back on track.
Hi folks. Hello.
Both had the chance to speak to the First Minister as he visited this morning. More than 14,000 households, including 9,000 children, are living in temporary accommodation. One of the main causes is a lack of social housing. The Scottish Government today announced £60 million to increase the supply.
Can you guarantee this will lead to fewer people in temporary accommodation next year and the following years?
Well, that is absolutely what we are committed to doing. We want to reduce the number of people that are in temporary accommodation. I've heard very powerful testimony today around how people want to get into settled accommodation and some of the barriers that are within the system itself that stop that from happening. So absolutely the government's drive is to, first of all, where we can, eradicate homelessness, but also reduce the use of temporary accommodation.
However, the charity Shelter Scotland believes the government's plan does not go far enough.
There's no new targets and there's no confirmation of new funding. There's a national acquisition plan which makes very little mention of the role that Scottish Government will take. My concern with that is that too much of the burden falls back on local authorities. We know they're already overstretched and underfunded, struggling to keep up with rising homelessness.
So it's all just a bit of shambles at the moment, I guess.
There is agreement further measures are needed to reduce the record numbers without a permanent place to call home. Ewan Petrie, STV News.
Scottish retail sales were at their highest since Christmas last month. Total sales increased by 11.3% in June compared with the same period last year, says the audit firm KPMG. But despite the strong summer showing, business leaders warn it's not sustainable.
It was over the summer month of June where we had terrific weather in Scotland. People were naturally out buying clothes for the summer, buying suntan lotions, buying shoes, etc. But unfortunately, these items and these products were all very heavily discounted by our retailers, which cannot continue because it simply does not cover the costs of doing business on our high streets and our city centres.
The Glasgow music venue, the 13th Note, is closing after workers went on strike in a row over pay and safety concerns. The owner says she's now been forced to call in liquidators after being sabotaged by the Unite Union. Selina Jackson reports.
This strike is being blamed for the closure of the 13th Note in Glasgow city centre. Staff walked out last weekend demanding urgent improvements to health and safety and better wages. Now it's shutting down for good. The owner, Jacqueline Fennessy, declined a request for interview. But in a statement, she says while post-lockdown pressures and inflation have put a strain on the business, the Unite Union is to blame for the closure. She says the strike action fully depleted available funds. And as a result, all staff members will now lose their jobs. After receiving the news, they again gathered outside the venue this afternoon.
The reason that we were out on strike at the weekend is because we're all precarious workers. We were already, for the vast majority of us, most of our members are chronically in debt due to how low the wages and how insecure the hours are work for Jacqueline. And so that was in work, and I mean it's immeasurable how much more an issue that's going to be out of work.
It leaves us quite vulnerable, very vulnerable. Like, we have rent to pay. She's just not thinking of us as human beings. We're just disposable to her.
Unite says Ms Fennessy had promised not to go ahead with redundancies until the union had met with her and the arbitration body. It's accusing her of trade union intimidation.
We were coming to the table with high hopes and good faith to discuss next steps with Jacqueline Fennessy. Instead, what she's done in completely bad faith is she's cancelled that meeting and she's told the press before she's even told her own workers that they're going to lose their job. That's not just morally reprehensible, that's potentially unlawful.
Workers say they're now considering trying to take control of the venue, but for now, their future and that of the 13th Note is uncertain. Selina Jackson, STV News, Glasgow.
Other stories in the West, and Glasgow's traffic wardens have voted to strike during next month's cycling championships. 95% of parking staff back industrial action after rejecting a 5.5% pay offer. Meanwhile, a new stretch of cyclepath has opened. The East City Way has been extended past Celtic Park and the Emirates Arena, where some of next month's cycling championship events will be hosted. Athletes and enthusiasts hope the new route and the championships will get people on their bikes.
And this recent infrastructure improvement is massive. It's a good example of what we look for throughout Glasgow to encourage people like me to do more and more cycling.
Obviously, the UCI Track Cycling World Championships coming up next month, so it's good to get this open so that people can use it, also be inspired by it for what we're going to be doing in the velodrome, and then they can get use of it afterwards as well.
Glasgow's subway will close on 2 Sundays before the end of August. The shutdown is to allow new trains to run 2,000 miles, around 300 laps of the line, before the manufacturer hands them over to SPT. The subway will be closed on July 30th and August 20th. Rahman is here with the sport, and you actually have some football to show us this evening, right?
Have we, John? I've been watching the cricket all day.
I bet you have as well.
A wee bit, actually. No, we do have some football to show you. Rangers' first competitive game isn't until next month, but they were in action last night with a number of their summer recruits making their Ibrox debuts. Good evening. Ryan Jack believes Rangers are better equipped to challenge for trophies this season following the addition of 7 players in the summer. Michael Beale wants to further strengthen his squad. The Ibrox club hope to conclude a deal for Jose Cifuentes and remain keen on Feyenoord striker Danilo. Beale's team faced Newcastle United for Alan McGregor's testimonial last night.
22 years after making his Rangers debut, Alan McGregor bowed out of Ibrox after his 506th and final appearance for the Light Blues. The goalkeeper won 11 major honours across 2 spells and will be remembered as one of the club's all-time greats.
He's a modern day legend. He's got a highlights reel for the ages, and he's been fantastic for me. Firstly when I was here as a coach, and now as a manager. He's been a great player to work with in terms of standard and work ethic.
Newcastle United were backed by 8,000 travelling fans last night, and they were on their feet in the 16th minute after Miguel Almiron put the Premier League side one up. Just before half-time, McGregor was replaced by the new Rangers #1, Jack Butland. Another one of the club's summer recruits made his mark just after the hour mark. Sam Lammers dispossessed Bruno Guimaraes, then drew the Ibrox club level. With 3 minutes remaining, Scotland under-21 international Harrison Ashby won the match for Newcastle, heading past Butland. For Michael Beale, a good test before the new season. The Ibrox boss has signed 7 players this summer and is keen to add Feyenoord striker Danilo and Los Angeles midfielder Jose Cifuentes to his squad.
Danilo's a player that we like. I think a lot of people like him. He's not the only forward we're talking to. That's the one that seems to have been let out, more public, but there's no news on it. Cifuentes is again a player that we like, and we're hoping that that one can be one that we moved on. I think we need to bring one more midfielder in. He's powerful, he works the corridor.
And new additions are being welcomed by the players.
That's why the manager initially strengthened the squad, because last year wasn't good enough, and we wanted to improve the squad. We want to have more quality, more options, and I think we've done that so far. And as you say, there might be a few more coming in, so it's all going to help us to obviously try and go and be successful and try and win trophies.
In other football news, Livingston manager David Martindale has hit back at those questioning the age of new signing Michael Nottingham, saying he'll bring huge experience to the team. The defender, who is 34, joins on a one-year deal following his departure from Accrington Stanley. Nottingham says he was impressed by the vision and potential of the West Lothian club.
Obviously I'm 34, so there's a stigma in football that when you get to a certain age, you get into the end of your career. However, I don't feel like I'm like that. I still feel like I've got plenty left in me. I chose this club because I feel like when I spoke to the gaffer, it's a club going in the right direction.
People will be asking questions, what are you doing signing a 34-year-old player? Michael comes with 130 odd games in League One. Now, to just put you in the picture, I don't get players with 130 games in League One. I get players with 130 games in the National League, the National League South, the National League North.
Rugby news, and Grant Gilchrist believes Scotland have never been better placed to compete at a World Cup. Gregor Townsend's squad are preparing for the tournament, which gets underway in France in September, and the front row forward says the team is continuing to improve.
This team's been together and on a bit of a journey since 2019. I think we've got better year on year, and we're in a position where, if not now, then never, is my opinion. Like, you know, we've done the work. We've had the experiences as a team, good and bad, to shape it, and we now know. I think we know what we need to do.
Boxing, and Lee McGregor admits he was questioning his boxing future just 10 weeks ago before agreeing what he calls a life-changing world title fight with Eric Robles. The Edinburgh fighter makes his homecoming at Meadowbank Stadium on Friday night with the vacant IBO Super Bantamweight title up for grabs. Here's Ollie Dickinson.
Back where he wants to be and ready to go. Lee McGregor's headline homecoming on Friday night against Eric Robles is a fight a long time coming. His first in the capital since debuting here 6 years ago.
I've been visualising it for so long. This is what I dream about as a kid, headlining in my hometown. I'm going to be tunnel vision, I'm going to be focused on my job and what I need to do to come out victorious.
After winning British, Commonwealth and European titles inside just 10 fights, McGregor's promising career stalled. Big money fights against Cash Farouk and Jason Maloney fell through, and whilst he remains unbeaten, the 26-year-old has fought just 3 times in 3 years.
I was getting to the stage where I was saying, I don't know, to my partner and that, I don't know if I can keep doing this to myself. That was only as little as probably 10 weeks ago. Now look where I'm 2 days out from the biggest fight of my life, achieving a lifelong dream of mine. It's time to start this new chapter.
Friday night, though, marks the start of a 5-year deal with World Boxing Super Series promoters Kalle and Nisa Sauerland. The Wasserman team say they've always been fans of the Scottish fighter.
I remember meeting Lee back in, 2018, I think, and I remember thinking, this kid can go places, he's got the right mental attitude as well. And when the opportunity came around to sign him, I took it straight away.
McGregor knows a win on Friday could change his life and open up big fights, perhaps even at his beloved Tynecastle. For now, though, he says it's time to take this second chance at boxing glory. Ollie Dickinson, STV News.
One final piece of football news. Jerry Britton is to stand down as Partick Thistle Chief Executive at the end of this month. He's been in the post for 5 years. And the Women's World Cup gets underway tomorrow. You can watch the tournament live right here on STV, starting with Australia against the Republic of Ireland. Kick-off is at 11 o'clock. Coverage begins at 10:15 tomorrow morning.
All right, thanks very much, Rahman. OK, let's take a look at the weather now. And here's Philip with the forecast.
Things are hotting up. TUI sponsors STV Weather.
Hello, good evening. Well, as we look towards the weekend, at the moment there is an area of high pressure out in the Atlantic trying to push its way in, which would have given us pleasant conditions. Unfortunately, that fails, and it allows low pressure to move through overnight Friday into Saturday and into Sunday, bringing with it wet and windy conditions. At the moment, there is still a bit of uncertainty as to the timing that rain will arrive, but we will keep an eye on that. Back to just now, and as we head through this evening and overnight, there are still a few scattered showers and some bright spells to end the day. Eventually, overnight, those showers will start to ease and clear away, and for many of us, it's turning largely dry. And like previous nights, we will see some clear skies. So with the clear conditions, temperatures dropping away, it will be a bit of a chilly night in some rural spots, temperatures getting down between 3 and 6 degrees Celsius. Now looking ahead to tomorrow, a bright but a chilly start to the day anywhere that we've seen those clear skies overnight. We hold on to the brightness for much of the morning, but then as we head into the afternoon, we start to see some further scattered showers developing, and some of these could be quite heavy at times. In the best of the sunny spells, though, it's still feeling pleasantly warm, temperatures reaching highs of around 17 or 18 degrees Celsius. And then looking ahead to Friday, a similar looking day, a mixture of sunny spells and further scattered showers. Some of those showers merging together into longer spells of rain, and just feeling a little bit cooler with highs of around 15 or 16. Bye-bye.
TUI sponsors STV Weather.
Oh, hopefully that weather will pick up eventually. Well, that's all from us this evening.
You've been hoping that for a long time, Kelly, and it still hasn't happened, but we'll see. Good night from all of us.
Good night.